Describe him as nervous, evasive. His voice was cracking.
The minute that I get post-conviction DNA testing, I'm confident of that because I know where I've been.
And they actually told me in jail after all of this, he's actually been requesting images of young girls.
Because the reason for that is, on death row, you get all your attorneys for your post-conviction for free. And the reason I did it too is because I wanted to go to death row.
Didn't remember anything due to a closed head injury that he sustained.
A jury took about 3 hours to convict Joseph Zyler in the 1990 tragic demises of 11-year-old Robin Cornell and her babysitter Lisa Story. More than 6 years after DNA matched him to the decades-old double slaughtering, Zyler now advances to the end penalty phase of the trial. Relatives of the victims sobbed and hugged each other as the court announced the verdict, while Zyler appeared stoic and looked toward Lee Circuit Judge Robert Branning. Zyler was charged in November 2016 with 2 counts of first-degree slaughter in connection with the May 9, 1990 slaying of Robin and Story in Cape Coral. Zyler of North Fort Myers, just hours prior to his conviction, took the stand to claim his innocence soon after his girlfriend told the jury about learning of the accusations, wiping tears and covering her face as she sobbed.
And the reason I did it too is because I wanted to go to death row.
How do you explain that? Who framed him? How did that,
Former girlfriend testifies changes in relationship. Bonnie Nicely had been in a relationship with Zyler since about Memorial Day 1990, until shortly after he was connected to the double homicide in November 2016. She said under oath that Zyler never had memory issues, contrary to what he told authorities when they confronted him about the slayings. Zyler had told him he suffered memory loss when a car struck his motorcycle along Pine Island Road and sent him to the hospital with a seriously fractured leg.
But what we learned from this conversation and putting together this story may surprise you.
I wasn't there that night to save either one of them, or at least hope one could get away.
The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder of Robin Cornell.
A wound on his left foot and a head injury. Nicely testified Zyler was able to read and write during those years as he stared at her during the testimony. She avoided eye contact and looked in the prosecutor's direction. Nicely testified he remembered when the couple met and never had trouble remembering his parents' names.
The minute that I get post-conviction DNA testing, I'm confident of that because I know where I've been.
Still, how do you explain away the DNA that was in every orifice of their body?
Calls caused tears in the courtroom. Nicely broke into tears when the courtroom played a recording of a phone call between Zyler and her while he was incarcerated. They played 3 calls between the couple. During the conversations, Zyler talked about having a backpack and making an escape. Nicely said she was angry during one of the September 2016 calls after she found out about the homicide allegations. She said that's when she broke off her relationship with Zyler. The calls played in the courtroom showed Zyler indicated he'd have to turn himself in for a separate crime, which he didn't disclose to Nicely. After the court discussed the separate phone calls, Nicely read a letter written by Zyler and sent to her, addressing the aggression toward her son.
Describe him as nervous, evasive. His voice was cracking.
Joseph Zyler broke into their Cape Coral home and carried out the horrific attack.
The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder of Lisa Story,
which led to the earlier 2016 arrest. Zyler's DNA was collected and stored in the database following that arrest, leading to a match in the cold case. "I will be seriously disappointed in you if you abandon me," Zyler warned Nicely in the correspondence. Zyler urged Nicely to have her bag already packed and get out of here. Nicely was questioned for about 90 minutes.
I'm going to take out my keys so I can talk.
For anything during this trial, any of his behavior.
Joseph Zyler testifies in court. As Zyler testified, he scrutinized Nicely's sworn statements. Zyler said that Bonnie is a big liar. That's why she was snickering up here with a smile on her face. Toward the beginning of questioning, Zyler said he didn't know any of the victims or Jan Cornell, Robin's mother. He later claimed the physical encounter with Jan Cornell. Shirley showed Zyler photos of the Cornell's home. Zyler said he never saw the photos or the apartment when police interviewed him about the slayings. In later questioning, he said there was a separate warrant for his arrest in May 1990 out of Maryland and confirmed a different 1987 warrant out of Chicago. Zyler said that since those incidents, he was stopped 5 times in Florida for the Chicago warrant, twice in Nicely's presence. Zyler later said he's been convicted of 5 felonies, but he said he wasn't guilty of the attacks on Robin and Story. When the Cape Coral police questioned him, he said he knew they arrested the wrong person.
Didn't remember anything due to a closed head injury that he sustained.
Their families have waited 33 years to hear those words.
Letters written to the Cornells questioned. As Zyler testified, a series of letters he wrote recently to the Cornell family became the focus. Zyler denied writing letters and avoided answering related questions. He later confessed to the writings, saying he was defending himself. In the letters, he suggested a relative of his committed the slayings. When asked, Zyler said the letters weren't just addressed to Jan Cornell, but the entire family. Zyler then claimed he slept with Jan Cornell in 1989 and called her a pig. Zyler said he guessed they were too much of a pig not to wash the sheets. He further added that he had night encounter with Cornell and a friend. As he continued to speak, a woman put her arm around Jan Cornell, sitting in the gallery. According to the letters, Zyler threatened them to drag them to the U.S. Supreme Court. As Zyler continued, he attempted to introduce documents allegedly linked to a case of his in Maryland, saying he was in court in that state at the time of the murders. At one point, Branning rushed jurors out of the courtroom as 2 deputies surrounded Zyler and removed the microphone because the information wasn't introduced into evidence and could have impacted jurors' decision. Branning said as he stared at Zyler, his tone condemning, that he's never had to speak to a defendant like this, and he regrets that Zyler's put him in this situation. Branning later threatened contempt proceedings against Zyler if his behavior continued.
New video tonight of the victims' families walking out of the courtroom after they heard the verdict.
As you'd expect, he went down the rabbit hole of I didn't do this or I didn't do that.
Jan Cornell again testifies. When Zyler was dismissed from questioning, prosecutors again called Jan Cornell. They addressed the alleged one-night intimate encounter with Zyler. Her voice shook as she stressed she didn't know Zyler or how he got her address, saying he reported the letters to authorities out of fear for her life. Jan Cornell said, adding she didn't know if any of her acquaintances knew Zyler, that she panicked because she didn't know how to get her real name and her address.
And they actually told me in jail after all of this, he's actually been requesting images of young girls.
He doesn't take responsibility for anything. I never heard him take responsibility.
Date: defense address evidence found on scene. Closing arguments arrived ahead of time. Prosecution had originally predicted they would wrap up later, followed by the defense. Russell addressed the 3 defenses in the case, previously mentioned in trial, dubbed the Big Three: the body of Robin Cornell and DNA found on a pillow and blanket. Russell said that this was a simple case. Russell circled back to what Jan Cornell found when she arrived the early morning of May 10, 1990. About 4 a.m.,
basically getting away with it for 3 decades until investigators finally caught him.
It only took the jury 3 hours to convict Zyler.
the ransacked house and her daughter's body. Russell said that the DNA is where this case really lies. Zyler stared down at papers in his possession and read through them as Russell continued. He added that, "Please remember what you saw and what you heard." Lee Hollander said analysts couldn't get the DNA out of blonde hairs recovered. Zyler's hair has never been blonde, and added that the DNA found wasn't only Zyler's.
Because the reason for that is, on death row, you get all your attorneys for your post-conviction for free.
What about all the actual science that was proven beyond a reasonable doubt?
Hollander said that whoever did this really hated Miss Cornell, alluding to how framed photographs were ransacked and placed on the home's ironing board. Circling back to the state in which Jan Cornell found her home, Hollander added that this type of viciousness is revenge. Hollander said 3 beer cans found at the crime scene were never tested for fingerprints. Hollander added that a toy found near the youngest victim was never checked for DNA or fingerprints. The state closed its arguments through Thornburg. who reiterated how Jan Cornell had denied shady business that could have led to the slayings out of revenge. Thornburg called Zeiler's defense fiction, adding that they followed all procedures questioned by the Hollander and Shirley. The science doesn't back it up, Thornburg said, adding that the state had proven the case beyond a reasonable doubt, that only one person in 1 billion Earths shares his DNA.
You have no clue at all. No, man.
Peter Kelly, he was more civil in my 20 minutes with him than I had ever seen Joseph Zeiler be in court.
Joseph Zeiler attacks his attorney. 3 decades after the tragedy took place, Joseph Zeiler was given capital punishment by a judge in Southwest Florida. The sentencing came not long after Joseph Zeiler elbowed his own attorney in the face in the courtroom. 10 out of 12 jurors recommended that Zeiler be sentenced to end after about 5 hours of deliberations. According to court records, the same jury previously found Zeiler, 60, guilty of 2 counts of first-degree slaying in the 1990 murders of 11-year-old Robin Cornell and 32-year-old Lisa Story. Before the sentence was officially handed down, Zeiler appeared in court with his wrists shackled.
What's that?
A video shows him call over attorney Kevin Shirley, who leaned forward to listen to something he assumed Zeiler was going to whisper to him. Instead, Zeiler flung his elbows up and struck the side of Shirley's head. 2 bailiffs immediately tackled Zeiler to the ground and escorted him out of the courtroom. Shirley said that he had no idea he was going to do something like that, adding that obviously Zeiler's been planning on that. But as it was going down, he said he was sorry he missed. The outburst and sentencing came after a trial in which Zeiler yelled at the jury and made vulgar gestures while he was on the witness stand. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.